Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
We absolutely support Israel's right to defend itself in line with international law.
We need to safeguard financial stability.
2024 is not going to be an easy year.
We used to call it the dream of home ownership, but look at Britain now.
We've got to hang on to optimism and hope because it is the biggest driver of change.
Let's stop thinking of life in terms of Brexit. Let's move on and look for the future.
Hello, you're listening to Bloomberg UK Politics. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Lizzy Burden.
Well, we made it to Friday. How's your week been?
Well, we made it to February, so I'm just glad it's not January anymore.
Yeah, well, that means you probably have had a much better week maybe than Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. I mean, actually, we've seen setbacks politically for both the parties this week. A lot of cracks appearing in policy and what people have said.
Yeah, we had a so-called U-turn from Labour right on the day of Labour's self-imposed policy deadline. They had this big commitment to spend £28 billion on green policies, and they've cut back on that. They've said it's no longer realistic. But this was exactly what the Conservatives wanted to attack Labour on, and Rishi Sunak, as you say, didn't have his best week either, because at Prime Minister's questions he made a trans jibe in front of the parent of the murderer, trans teenager Brianna Gay, and he has not gone down well on my social media feed, put it that way.
No, absolutely not. And this also, of course, at the week that the Popular Conservatives group emerged under Liz Truss. So kind of more infighting, more discord, more factions within the Conservative Party. And then, of course, you've got to wonder where that leaves us looking forwards, because we've got 3 by-elections in February. February the 15th. It's my birthday, by the way.
Oh, noted.
Yes. Is either party going to, manage to get, take a step forwards in those? You've got 2 Tory by-elections, one with Labour defending.
Well, look, it's that Tory infighting that's really caused one of the Conservatives' most high-profile donors to actually say maybe it's time for a change in government. Nick Candy is who I'm talking about. He's, of course, the property entrepreneur, and he told Bloomberg that the recent squabbles within the Tory party left him sour on the Conservatives.
So I'm naturally a Tory. I voted for Tony Blair when he came into power. I think it's probably time for a change. I think all this infighting in the Tories, and even now with the talks of Kemi Badenoch replacing Rishi by mid-May, British people should know what's going on. And based on that, maybe it's time for some change. But we still don't know the Labour policies. But do I think Keir Starmer's a decent man with good values and good morals? 100%.
So Nick Candy there was speaking to Francine Lacqua on Bloomberg's In the City podcast. Look, he's best known for working alongside his brother Christian, creating One Hyde Park in London. Super, super expensive per square metre and beautifully made building. He's actually talked to us last year saying that he'd soured on London itself, telling Bloomberg his next project in Dubai is going to be even bigger, even better. So Fran was in the studio this morning talking to us about, what he had to say. And that actually her view was he had this very negative outlook just on the government as a whole.
Yeah, so he came on, he was interesting because he came on to talk about property,
yes,
right, and the property market, and he's very bullish on the Middle East. So it almost felt like at every chance he could try and take the government down, he would, because he just thinks, look, crime is out of control. He says it's very difficult to live in the UK. It's very difficult to raise money. But he did take a twist when he said, first of all, that he voted Labour a couple of years ago, which I didn't think.
Tony Blair.
And this time he says, look, they have good ideas. And we see Labour really trying to court business. When you speak again to the city, there's not that much details on how Labour would court business. We don't know anything about business taxation. We don't really know the details on what they would give back, carried interest and things like that. So again, you have these polls, but you don't really know the policies of Labour yet.
Yeah, and it's wondering whether the policies are stacked up in a back office somewhere waiting for them perhaps to win or not. But yeah, it's what we're trying to find out all the time, isn't it?
Yeah, and strategy again is the right strategy to not say anything, so you don't have the chance to the current government to attack you or to take some of your ideas. Or do you actually want to kind of muster a little bit of excitement around your party? I don't, I'm sure that's what the big thinkers in politics are trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Timing.
Yeah, very timely. He had views on private schools, didn't he? And the potential for a VAT slap onto the private schools.
20%. Yeah, it is a huge issue, isn't it, for some?
So you speak
for a minority.
Yes.
Well, for a minority, but actually, so what's surprising to me is that, and the Chancellor was talking about this yesterday, is that it always goes back to, the UK has the rule of law, but also the best universities, and the best universities and the best education. And so there's a lot of people that say if you attract capital from foreigners, a lot of the reasons why they're attracted to the UK is because they can put their kids in good schools, and you have this tie to UK even if you put your kids in boarding schools. So you have a lot of foreigners from the US, from the Middle East and Asia that do that. And so I think what Nick Candy was also arguing is that if you tax, if people decide to go elsewhere in terms of private schools for foreigners, does that make the UK less of a destination?
So useful context on Nick Candy there from Francine. What she didn't also mention was that he's married to Holly Valance. Do you remember
Holly
her?
Valance, yes.
There's the Neighbours star, wasn't she?
Yeah, absolutely. She
a
was
90s pop star
and a model and the whole thing. Yes, but of course the bit that got all of the Conservative Party attention was that she kind of said that it's only youngsters who start off lefty and then as we age we become more conservative, but once you realise, in her words, the ideas are crap. So there was a lot of backlash from the left wing about how that was. So anyway,
well, she was at the launch of Liz Truss's popular conservatism group. Who'd have thought she'd be the poster girl for the Conservative Party? Didn't have that on my 2024 bingo card. I thought it was interesting, the point by Nick Candy, just this idea that there's not much difference in terms of policy between them, because it's often an attack line that it's a copy and paste job from Labour of Tory policies, but maybe that's actually a positive if you've got floating voters and ex-Tory donors looking for a new home.
Yeah, of course, it's the centre ground. Is this the battle for the centre ground? No, I think it's a really interesting point, but obviously it will be of concern to the Conservatives that someone who's got the kind of money that Nick Candy has in terms of donor money and support, that he's willing to give, well, frankly, the other lot a go.
Yeah, and Fran made a really interesting point, raising the question, is the right strategy for Labour at this point to say nothing? Well, we've got a head on strategy. We've got one of the best minds on strategy. It's John McTernan, former Labour strategist, Prime Minister Tony Blair's Director of Political Operations, in fact, from 2005 to 2007, and Julia Gillard's Comms Director. John, it's great to have you with us.
Great to be with you.
On Newsnight, you called this U-turn on the £28 billion a year pledge probably the most stupid decision the Labour Party has made. Why?
Well, you need to back up. The thing is, this is about a great purpose, and great parties need a great purpose. This is about, in a way, killing two birds with one stone. The UK needs an industrial strategy to get itself to a different economic equilibrium, which can drive growth and drive productivity and drive investment. The world, at the same time, is facing climate crisis. Nobody doubts the climate crisis is real. So an industrial strategy that is based on decarbonisation is a great offer to the country, gives you a reason for changing to vote for Labour. Because I disagree with the comment just made that maybe it's a strength to be almost identical as parties. I actually don't think the parties are identical. I think there are big differences. But I think in a change election, you need to be a change option with a change proposition. And this was a huge change proposition. So if there are issues with the way that the policy was formulated, it is the very old Labour way in which they were formulated. It was all about the number and not about the impact, the outcome. So it was all process, no purpose. Because as I said, great parties have great causes, they have great purposes. And this should have always been the discussion. And if you're going to change the number, it should have been done at the end of Liz Truss's 49 days. And it should have been tied round Liz Truss, because we spent the time since the Truss quartering disaster basically saying what right have the Tories to say anything about economic policy and fiscal prudence after Truss and quartering? The only thing they should be saying is sorry to everybody.
Well, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, says she's not sorry for scrapping this green policy, green pledge. Keir Starmer, as you say, blames it on sort of Tory economic mismanagement. The problem is that Keir Starmer's replaced one issue around spending with another, which is indecision and U-turning. Is that, and that's the accusation that we've heard from the Prime Minister's, sort of every Prime Minister's questions for the last few weeks and months. So how big an issue is that going to be for Starmer going forwards?
I think the Tory attack has got a problem. And again, you need to kind of step back. In one sense, the Tory attack is that they have a plan and Labour don't have a plan. That's the contrast. The problem is the Tories have got the wrong plan, a plan the government have admitted, the Prime Minister's admitted, isn't going to reduce waiting lists. One that Laura Trott, the Chief Secretary of Treasury, seems unable to understand. Actually, it's got rising proportion of debt.
You're referring to her interview with Evan Davis on the BBC.
Car crash interview with Evan Davis, yeah. The Tories, you can only make a plan, no plan, dividing line if you've got the right plan. The Tories clearly don't have the right plan. So one of the reasons I think the Green Prosperity Plan was strong because everybody knows the need to decarbonise. Would the Tories do it quickly, well, and fairly? Well, no, they don't do anything competently, let alone quickly. They don't do anything fairly. So it was a good contrast for Labour. But when you come to the refined policy, Labour's still going to create Great British Energy with £8 billion pounds worth of capital. Labour's still going to be retrofitting our homes, and warm homes as a programme contrasts dramatically with the Tories' inability to sort out where they are with heat pumps or with insulation or with any of the programs, which again, we know we all need to do, which industry requires as a stable framework for planning and for investment. Now, I think the difficulty about it's a fundamental one, the difficulty about sticking a U-turn or a flip-flop onto an opponent as an issue is the public don't mind when a party corrects to where they think that party really stands. It's when you correct yourself to a position, people go, you've kind of undermined who you are and who you say. Labour has been, under Starmer and Reeves, a party dedicated to fiscal prudence, a party dedicated to saying will not be a threat on tax and spend. This policy correction, which I have disagreed with,
yeah, but hang on a second. I read your piece in depth in January, where you were incredibly critical of the Labour Party, saying that actually, if anything, the Green Plan needed to be sold. The Green Labour plan needed to be sold more. That it needed to be fleshed out as a full industrial strategy. Now you're rowing back and saying actually it's not so bad that they've done a U-turn.
I'm commenting on whether the question you asked me, which is, do I think that the Tories have got a good attack strategy? I don't, nor the voters. And that's the issue. The issue is did Labour make the right decision? I don't think so. Will it damage Labour with the voters? No, I don't think so. Look at the YouGov poll in the Times this morning, where Labour's lead is 25 points. Do I think the Tories have an attack strategy that can work? Well, just look at them on social media in the last 12 hours or so.
Yeah,
they've been trying to say two separate things. One is it's a U-turn, but also the 28 billion is a real number and it's a threat for tax to spend. It's one or the other. And this is the difficulty with the Tory strategy. That's within the weeds of. They spent a long time trying to say that Keir is boring, and now they want to say he's risky. You can be boring, but you can't be risky.
But look, the Tories also U-turned on their green policy. Labour's got a 20-point poll lead. Isn't it the case that Labour could afford to drop this politically and they couldn't afford the commitment economically? So as Wes Streeting's out there saying it was better to be honest now about what Labour can do in power if they get in and actually live up to the manifesto and be realistic?
Look, I think Wes, as ever, made an eloquent case for what is now the party policy. My view about the next decade is that we don't simply face an issue around decarbonising the economy. We face the need to replace the rack concrete in schools and hospitals and defence establishments and many other places, I imagine. We face the challenge of actually investing in social care. We face the challenge of local authorities going bankrupt. We face the challenge not just of waiting lists in the NHS, but of A&E waiting times, of access to GPs, of a crisis in the ambulance service.
All of which costs money, yeah.
No. But what I'm saying is, we actually need for Labour to go back to give us a sense of the bigness of the missions that matches the bigness of the scale of challenges that we have. And we cannot allow, and you did it, Labour cannot allow this to be a Treasury brain conversation. How do you find the money? The Tories, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak went to Northern Ireland and gave them 3.3 billion. Nobody said, where's the money coming from? Everybody knows the government can find money.
Well, here at Bloomberg, the markets have proved themselves the guardrails, and it's been the emphasis of our coverage. Indeed, given the crash in the markets after the mini budget, it was so important to underscore the importance of fiscal responsibility. So, we've not forgotten it. But I want to ask you about your point that Labour needs to be the change party, because I feel like that's what you're really getting at. Do you think that there's the intellectual heft in Labour to be the change party? Because I speak to people who worked around Blair and Brown in the civil service, and they say that Starmer and co just don't have the plans ready to go in the same way that New Labour did.
Well, one of the biggest things that Gordon did was a secret, wasn't it? Wasn't a plan. Independence of the Bank of England was just it was not in the manifesto. It was just announced. So we need to be careful about romanticizing what New Labour did. I did the health pledge. The health pledge, the New Labour health promise, was to cut the waiting lists, starting by having an extra 100,000 operations. That's what there was. That's what the actual promise was. It wasn't a radical transformation of the health service. That came after Frank Dobson was replaced as the health secretary. It came after, it came with Alan Milburn. It came with John Reid, the reforming. So we need to be careful. A lot of New Labour's radical reforms came in the second term. The first term is always important for any government. Broadly the same with Margaret Thatcher. In her first term, she bought off the miners, didn't have a miners' strike. The first term is to establish some stability, to establish direction, to establish with Labour that you can be trusted to govern, so you can win a second term. The second term is the one in which you make the changes, and the third term is the one in which, by serving for a third term, you embed the changes and make them irreversible. So the notion that there was a golden era of an incredibly strong Labour cabinet. Tony's first cabinet was forced on him by the Parliamentary Labour Party. They elected the shadow cabinet, and he had to put them in positions in the first cabinet. So there is the intellectual left, and I've got a piece coming out shortly in which I point out the obvious, which is Blair had the Social Justice Commission, the IPPR's work. Blair also, I've said this often before, Blair had all the thinking from Marxism's day. The rethinking of Labour that Marxism's day did, which is kind of Gramscian Marxist analysis. Beveridge provided an intellectual spine for Attlee and the welfare state. Labour's got stuff out there. I think the Resolution Foundation's new economic strategy for Britain ending stagnation. The work has been done in that sense, and for me, the question is: we know the work. We know the work's there. We know the problems are there. We know the resources are there. We absolutely know, for example, that the solution to a cluster of issues around social care and around local government are around finance, and that finance will be property-based finance. And we know that there is a lot of wealth in property, and that has to be taxed. We know there's an issue around road tax falling. There'll be a gap of 80 billion by the end at the end of the decade if Treasury just carry on the current format. We know that therefore means road charging. This is the issue, which is there's no route that doesn't involve a radical reform of the state, a radical reform of provision, a radical reform of tax, a radical forms of redistribution. That for me is the issue. If you've got a mission-based approach, you're saying, how can we do this together? If you've got these issues, you have to get out there and use your 25-point lead to get a mandate for change. And I know people say, get in the majority, get in, and then say you've got a mandate. The public are well informed, well educated, and they're not going to go, oh, we've just voted for a pig in a poke. You don't have the legitimacy to make the changes you're now proposing to us. In some form, that has to be either a commitment to an open conversation with the public when you're a government, or at some point, an open conversation with the public now. And the danger of where we're heading is, in the end, Labour can't be the party for which the answer to every question is no.
John, thank you so much for being with us. John McTernan is Labour strategist, of course, and a really interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time speaking to us this morning. So we may have started off then talking about Keir Starmer shredding the pledge on the transition to green energy and the money that the Labour Party would put towards that, or at least significantly diminishing it. But we've come full circle really to the idea of a radical Labour Party. Totally fascinating.
Yeah, and the whole point, isn't it, is to grow the economy, get jobs into Britain. And a huge part of that comes back to attracting investment. Well, at an industry dinner last night, the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Jeremy Hunt, told Francine, who we heard from earlier in the programme, that a British ISA could be one way to induce more UK capital to be invested in our most promising companies as a tax-free vehicle to get money into stocks. And it's interesting, isn't it, given that a British ISA wasn't announced in the autumn statement, even though Hunt set out changes to the ISA system then. And he's also said that he'd like London, Caroline, to become Europe's NASDAQ, in light of all the other reforms they've done to try and make it easier for companies to list in London. Well, you've got to wonder whether it's all talk. So we've hauled in one of the smartest minds in the city to tell us. It's Simon French, Chief Economist and Head of Research at Panmure Gordon, who also used to work at the Cabinet Office and the Department for Work and Pensions. Simon, thanks for coming to join us.
Thank you, Lizzy, and it's an unnecessarily kind invite, but I'll take it.
Well, you and I are 2/3 of the Northerners who like economics lunch club, so of course that was going to be kind. Look, first of all, can you just explain for us what a British ISA would look like for anyone who's unfamiliar with the idea?
Yes, and it's important to say that the Treasury are almost certainly working on a variety of potential versions of a Brit ISA. There isn't one that comes off the shelf. You could have a situation where the entire £20,000 annual allowance is eligible for, or the only eligible assets are UK listed equity. You could say it's a proportion of that 20,000. You could add a proportion on top of the 20,000. There are all sorts of permutations, but the broad principle that they will all be guiding towards is that at the moment, Britain saving within a stocks and shares ISA get the same tax relief whether they're buying US listed, European listed or UK listed equity. And while as savers, that's a pretty neutral impact, they're going after whatever they think will maximise their returns, and entirely rationally so, it has an impact on the wider economy because that also impacts the cost of capital, the cost of investment for UK listed, US listed, European listed companies. And one of the arguments that the Treasury, I think, are now sympathetic to is, why is the tax system subsidising the cost of capital for Nvidia, for Tesla, for Amazon, the types of companies that don't necessarily have a big blowback to Europe, to UK economic growth. And therefore, perhaps we should use this lever to support investment in the UK economy.
Sure. The flip side is, though, that the UK stocks have not done well compared to US stocks. Last year they didn't, and if you look historically, they haven't returned very well either. So, would you be forcing people into that sort of asset? So, my question to you is: Do you think it would work? Do you think it would help? Who would it help?
Well, in terms of quantum, outflows out of UK equity has been pretty consistently in one direction for about 7 years since the Brexit referendum in 2016. And that has pushed valuations down to a position about 20% below their global benchmark. What do we think a British ISA could do? Well, I think it could potentially reverse that direction of flows. And of course, one has to think about the performance going forward, not just the historical performance. And if you have an undervalued asset I was in New York last week speaking to US investors, they all agree they would like to own more UK equity because it is cheap compared to their market. They see lots of attractive UK companies, but they're going, well, at the moment, your domestic savers in the UK don't want to own this, so why would we? And one of the things that must be attractive to the Treasury is getting a valuation cycle going, a revaluation cycle upwards. And that kind of potential movement of about £20 billion worth of assets through the stocks and shares ISA could be very material. And therefore, the type of companies that currently are staying private or relisting in the US, which is, of course, reinforcing that underperformance that you mentioned, Caroline, and you're spot on, that starts to go in the opposite direction. And that really is the prize that the Treasury is looking to go after rather than obsessing about historical performance.
So what do you make of the Europe's NASDAQ line? Does it belong on the same shelf as AI superpower and Singapore on Thames?
You know, Lizzy, that I don't like these sound bites. They have a political resonance, perhaps. They certainly help chancellors, Twitter or X and Instagram accounts. I don't think serious investors take too much notice of that. The very, very strong message that came out again from my trip to the US last week was that US investors are still very attracted to the UK economy for some good structural, fundamental reasons, but don't see much of a economic growth narrative, an industrial strategy, a growth strategy. And I picked the back end of the last interview you just had on Labour Party's growth strategy and how that may evolve. There was some concern that the one piece that you could see an incoming Labour government sort of centre around, which is their green investment, is now potentially being watered back quite appreciably. That's a bigger problem for both the existing government and potential future government than a soundbite about a European NASDAQ, which candidly nobody thinks is going to happen anytime soon.
No, absolutely. Simon, very interesting. Thank you so much for being with us. Simon French, Chief Economist and Head of Research at Panmure Gordon. So I think that really is the reflection of, investors, of people in the City of London. They slightly are weary of, perhaps even scoff at these kind of taglines, that the City of London's stock exchange could be like Europe's NASDAQ. We're just such a long way from being that kind of size and heft. I think it's sort of difficult for people to take it that seriously, but you heard Simon's view.
Well, we'll keep discussing it as we head towards the budget, but that's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe and give it 5 stars so other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by Tiwa Adebayo and our audio engineer was Marufa Hussain. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Lizzy Burden. We'll be back with more on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.